Hi everyone, it's the Rangers Review. We're here for your deadline day special. We might not have much to talk about in terms of breaking news, in terms of developments and deals that could happen, Chris. But we're here because we are professionals, and we're gonna stick to what we said we would do. But listen, we'll spend an hour looking through the window, some of the talking points from today, but also hopefully getting through a lot of your questions. Chris, first and foremost, it's been another long deadline day. It's maybe not going to be as long as previous editions because if people don't know the news, the latest from Rangers about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago was that they were not expecting any more business for the rest of the January transfer window. They were trying up until today to get a wide player in. There was hopes that could be achieved, but as we'll get into, that has not materialised. Bring us up to speed, Chris, if someone has not been keeping up to date with Rangers transfer deadline day. Bring us up to speed with where we are and well, I guess not what to expect, because as I've already given away, we're sorry, we're back. We're back, Chris. We're back. You know what I did? I put my phone hotspot on it, and I pressed the aeroplane mode. Always the worst. For the people watching at the other end of the live stream, there's actually not a worse feeling in the world when you see a little Wi-Fi signal pop up on the Rangers Review morning briefing, then you know something's wrong. But Chris, I'll throw it back to you. I'll start again. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Bring us up to speed with deadline day and Rangers and when we're up to, and hopefully I'll remain here while you give me your answer.
There's something quite apt about how this show has started. To be fair, is it only 12 hours ago that we sat here and discussed what could play out? Here we are. The Rangers, as people will know by now, as we reported at 3 o'clock, they have signed Lyall Cameron on a pre-contract deal. He will move to Ibrox in the summer from Dundee. I think the first question we all got when we broke that news earlier on was, will Rangers go and try and sign him before the deadline? It was evident early on that was not going to be the case. Rangers are happy for him to remain at Dens Park for the second half of the season. So that was deal one, and it turned out to be the only one. It's the only bit of business incoming that Rangers have done today. We do expect Zach Lovelace to leave the club. He will go back down south and join Millwall. As we reported earlier on the site, Rangers expect a six-figure fee and potential add-ons for that, which I think, considering the situation, is a good deal. He made it clear that he wanted to leave, and Rangers, we know that they are going a different direction. They want to give some of their young players chances. We want to see them get those chances in the first team and go and show what they can do. Lovelace not in the squad for the game on Sunday, and we'll now finalise that. We'll now finalise that move to head back down the road. The only other real kind of rumour doing the rounds was the winger from PSV, who on the show with Johnny earlier on, I butchered his surname. So I think it's Druech.
Yes,
Again,
so.
I apologise to him earlier on if I got it wrong, and I will do so again if he's tuning in for the second time. But again, as we had on the site earlier on, and as we reported, there was nothing in that. That was not one of the wide players that Rangers were interested in and they were pursuing. So it's kind of filtered or kind of turned into a bit of a damp squib for a number of people. But I think as we've said over the course of the window, as we alluded to this morning, we didn't really expect Rangers to be really, really busy this month. It was never going to be the case. We had made that clear right at the start. Patrick Stewart made that clear when he spoke to us and other members of the media a couple of weeks ago. So I think anyone who was expecting 3 or 4 in, they were always going to be disappointed. But I do understand why people were expecting another one in. We touched on it this morning, spoke to Johnny about it earlier on. I think Rangers are light in the wide areas. I think they're light in the forward areas, and that's the one frustration for the supporters. They got the deal they wanted in terms of centre half, in terms of Fernandes coming in. That addressed an issue, but I think in that final third, I do think Rangers are still short, and I do fully understand the frustration and the disappointment amongst the fans that has not been the case over these last few hours of business.
Yeah, and there's a lot to get into, Chris, because if you go back to what Patrick Stewart said at the start of the window, he said it would be 1 or 2. It's materialised in what would you say, 1.5, because Lyall Cameron is coming in the summer, and we'll speak about Lyall Cameron a little bit later on in the show. I think you can simultaneously say 2 different things, Chris, and say that what Rangers are doing, and we've outlined this, we had the interview with Niels Koppen a few months ago, we've outlined it in other elements of our reporting over recent months. There is more of a long-term view, which I think someone like Clinton Nsiala probably epitomises this month. He was signed in the summer window. Hamza Gaman started to make his impact around about late November time, Chefty slightly earlier. But someone like Nsiala, I think Fernandes fits very much into that bracket too, where it's, while he wasn't ready to make this impact at the start of the season, neither was Hamza Gaman. It is about trying to look beyond that, sign a little bit cheaper, sign younger, but ultimately understand that Rangers don't have the money to do a quick fix, and they have to stick with something for a concerted period of time. So I think simultaneously you can say that, and by all accounts, Fernandes is a profile that Rangers are pretty excited by. Again, we'll get on to Cameron later today. You can say that and still say, but have the board invested enough? Have promises been kept? Has even accounting for the money that was achieved by that Europa League place in the final 8 of the Europa League, has the investment been sufficient? Because while there isn't a league to play for, there is still very much the potential of a European run to go on. Now, Rangers can only make so many additions to that squad, Chris. Obviously, there's a Scottish Cup there as well. So is it right in saying that you could simultaneously say that? I think long-term what Rangers are doing recruitment-wise makes sense. I think you can see that it's working. January is a difficult window, and you're always better, I think, trying to look long-term rather than panicking and just trying to get someone in on deadline day. You can say that while simultaneously questioning, is the money being made available for recruitment enough? And as a club, are Rangers getting that balance right between, yes, we need to win later, but also we need to win what we're competing in just now as well?
I don't think it's a massive surprise that they haven't either spent a lot of money in this window or committed themselves to a lot of money for the summer window. You look at the situation in the Premiership being the most pertinent one. If Rangers were 6 points behind Celtic, I think you would have seen the board say, look, we're not that far away. 1 signing, 2 signings could make a big difference. That difference being you go on and win the league. The situation is Rangers are not going to win the league. They're not going to get anywhere near winning the league. So you wouldn't have been investing in the squad to go and try and win that particular competition. Are Rangers going to go and win the Europa League? Probably not. Would 1 signing have made a difference?
Don't tell Derek that, because he's already looking at Bilbao. But I take your point.
I know he's sitting in Greenland somewhere watching us and looking at Skyscanner to get flights to Spain later on in May. But one bit of business in January is not going to be a difference between Rangers winning the Europa League or not. The Scottish Cup, yes, if you sign the right player, it could make a difference by the time you get to a final, potentially against Celtic. Is that then worth the investment? Probably not. But the flip side of that is this is a long-term rebuild. Rangers, they have got themselves in a position where the squad was imbalanced in some areas, bloated in other areas. The wage bill was too high for what it was actually producing on the pitch, and that had to be addressed. We saw that in the summer. We've spoken a lot and written a lot about different profiles of players coming in and how they're going about the transfer market in a different way. When you're doing that, you have to make the most of every transfer window. Now, time will tell come the end of the season how successful the summer was. January in that way feels a bit of a missed opportunity. So yes, players have left, but a lot of the problems have been kicked down the road over both transfer windows. Ben Davies away on loan. You've got players leaving on loan in this window, like Matondo, like Dowell. There's still a Cifuentes deal to try and sort to get him off the books permanently. So Rangers do still have a lot of players picking up a lot of money that they're getting zero value for, and that this manager doesn't want, and that Niels Coppen has decided are not good enough. So they've put that problem down the road, but not really addressed the bigger problems in the squad in terms of how do you keep adding to it to keep getting better. We don't know what Fernandes is going to bring. I think we know what Cameron is going to bring, but again, that's a solution for down the road. So as I said at the start, I do understand the frustration amongst the fans. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence and making two different points there. One, I'm not surprised that they haven't gone bigger in this window. I think it makes sense not to have gone bigger. But on the opposite side of that, it does feel like something of a wasted opportunity. Could they have done other deals, other pre-contracts, perhaps other loans with different parts on them, just to keep the squad ticking over almost and keep giving it that freshness that it certainly requires.
Yeah, and speaking to people today, I think in an ideal world, if Rangers had been able to announce that Lyall Cameron deal today and then got a winger in either on a loan or a loan to buy basis, that would have been an ideal situation because it would have given them the that's what they wanted, that's what they were working towards, but ultimately were unable to get over the line. Let's get to some comments, Chris. Maldo says he's worried about the depth, but it gives kids a chance to play. We'll come on to that because I guess youth promotion is very much one of the predominant stories of this transfer window at Ibrox. Ryan says, evening all. Club said at the start of the month, one, maybe two, and that's what happened, so I'm not too upset. Would have loved a winger today. Comment here is saying he's gutted that Zach Lovelace is away. James, good friend of the show, says, was hoping for another wide player, but doesn't look like it. Hopefully young players will be given chances in league games. Hugo Bear, limited options in the January transfer window. Alan asking, is this yet another board failure? I mean, Chris, if again, taking away the investment conversation, if we're speaking about what Clement and Coppen and Patrick Stewart have available and have to work with, one of the positives of this window is you have got quite significant wages off the books, and we spoke about this in the summer when Rangers had taken several million off their wage bill, which had just grown totally out of control. And we won't spend this stream, even though we do have time to fill, we won't spend it talking again about how Rangers have got there. But Alex Lowry was on first team wages and had signed a good long-term contract a few years ago. There's a number of young players who've gone out on loan where and the wages there, it's not really about covering the cost, it's more about getting game time. I'm thinking of the likes of Robbie Fraser and Cole McKinnon, Archie Stevens, amongst others. But also the fact you've got Rabbi Matondo on a loan to buy out the door. You've got Kieran Dowell. In an ideal world, again, you probably put these players out permanently, but if they do well on loan, as a lot of loan players have from the summer, like Cifuentes and Ben Davies, again, off the top of my head, Matondo scored that goal at the weekend. Dowell started well by all accounts too. Then I guess it is about trying to put these players somewhat in the shop window. That saves money up until the summer too. So is there a positive slant in terms of the outgoings that Rangers have managed this month? Because we could be sitting here, I think this conversation was Rangers hadn't brought a lot of players in, and Dowell and Matondo the likes were still here, then the tone would be different. Is that fair?
I think the tone would be a lot worse if that was the case. Now we seen the kind of reaction to it on social media since we reported that was Rangers done for the day. We see the reaction on the show tonight. I think if there was this case of Rangers will still be relying on Matondo, they still be relying on Dow, further back still be relying on Davies and others. I think that would have put a very different slant on the mood of the support. I think if you look at it in terms of, if you take it in like two parts, incomings, I don't think it has been a sensational window. It's been as expected. Outgoings, I think it has been good from Rangers perspective. And you touched on the wages and the money saved there. They have to keep getting the higher earners out. The players that are not contributing, they have to be moved on. There's too many players over too many seasons have picked up too much money, and Rangers have not won enough with them on the books. So looking ahead to the summer, it then becomes a challenge, obviously, for Niels Coppin and for the board. Can you turn some of these loans into permanents? Can you get rid of Kieran Dowell on a permanent deal? You also hope that Hanover pick up the deal on Matondo. There's going to be others. Some of the younger players will be allowed to move on. Certainly Fraser, there'll be a question over him, regardless of how well he does that at Livingston. Same with Devine, same with Leon King falls into that category, same with Cole McKinnon. And you're then looking at other bigger players within the squad. Tom Lawrence, his future doesn't look like it's going to be at Ibrox. We didn't think it was going to be at Ibrox beyond the end of this window, but it certainly won't be beyond the end of the season. The Cyril Dessers question will come back come the end of the season as well. I'm sure there'll be questions about Danilo. So there's going to be another turnover. There's going to be another fairly significant turnover actually of players, and that's again a situation that Rangers are going to have to address, because you saw the fees that were received in this summer, and everyone thought it was a typo within the accounts. No matter how many times we said it wasn't and it was accurate, it was then confirmed at the AGM that it was accurate. It shows the difficult position that Rangers have allowed themselves to be in, because too many players picking up too much money, and it then becomes hard to shift them on and to get any sort of value. So they had to do what they could in this window, try and bring the squad size down, try and bring the wage bill down. But ultimately, that problem, it's going to be looming fairly large in the summer once again.
Yeah, and I guess the thing about the summer window as well, let's say hypothetically Matondo doesn't stay in Germany, but he's had a good loan spell. Summer gives you a lot longer to actually, I guess, find a permanent buyer, which January doesn't really. Those players have been told they don't have a future. So I do think there's a little bit more developed than those players just come back. I don't think Matondo or Dowell is going to come back and play a big part in Clement's kind of pre-season plans, but we shall wait and see. Chris, Johnny's going to come on in about 10 minutes' time to probably laugh at some of my football opinions and tell them they're wrong. But before we go, I want to talk a little bit about Lyall Cameron, and also kind of what I said there, the story of the window being that of youth players. Graham saying this 5 months give the opportunity to review potential of youth before we see where to invest in the summer. Bailey Rice is now a fully fledged first team player. I think that's overdue, but good to see that pathway is now there. Finlay Curtis has signed that long-term contract. He'll be part of first team plans for the remainder of the season, alongside Paul Ncio, who came off the bench twice last week. Mason Munn made his debut. Again, to repeat a bit of a point, but Rangers have done so many different things within their youth academy. They're bringing Kevin Thompson back, as we revealed last week, to be part of this new setup. But again, that is one thing that I think is a positive to come out of this window. While it's not signings, while it's not new players coming in, it is important that there is some form of youth pathway there. I don't think it's a coincidence that the mood is somewhat improved while these young players have come into the side, because you see even Bailey Rice coming off the bench at the weekend, and it gives everyone a lift, because people just want to see, I think, at clubs all around the world, but especially somewhere like Rangers where maybe that pathway hasn't worked well, they want to see young players playing, and this gives the likes of Rice and Curtis the opportunity to show between now and the summer that I guess they're ready for a place in the squad next season too.
that's the opportunity that they've been given. That's the opportunity that they have, that they've wanted. That's the opportunity they've been waiting for. So if they can go and take it, they have a place in the squad next season. If they don't, you're then looking at what kind of development plan the Rangers then have for them. They will still all be younger players. I think, as we touched on this morning, by the time you get to 19, 20 or so, you can't be classed as a really young player at that stage. It's not quite a make or break couple of months for them, but it's a huge opportunity for them. If Rice can go and show that he's more than capable of being at the level, he then keeps that place in the squad come the summer, and that perhaps changes what Rangers then go and do in the summer. If they hold on to Raskin, to Diomande, don't expect Conor Barron to go anywhere. You've then got Rice, and you've got Lyall Cameron coming in. The Rangers' central midfield options are then fairly set. If you're Finlay Curtis, you've got a great chance, because we know that Rangers are short in the wide areas. If you can play on both sides as he can, there's going to be game time there for him. You can go and take that chance. You might not be the first choice heading into next season, but it should certainly be a good option for the manager to have. So this is the chance that these guys have now. Time will tell whether they are up to the level, and it was important, I think, in this window. Rangers had to clear that pathway. Pathway is one of my pet hate phrases in the game these days, because people speak a lot about it, and it doesn't really exist. It becomes one of these youth development cliches, if you like. But to use it and to continue on the theme, Rangers had to show that they were willing to give young players a chance. If they had gone and signed another wide player, or gone and signed a player in a position where these younger guys are trying to get through, they'd be quite rightly be thinking, well, what's the point in actually being here? If Finlay Curtis knew another winger was going to come in and take a squad place, why would he have committed himself to a new contract? Why would Bailey Rice have committed himself to a new contract not that long ago? So they had to see that those opportunities would be there. The manager's spoken enough about it. He mentions, he's asked about younger players and pressers. He mentions some of the guys that he's brought through at previous clubs during his time at Monaco and obviously in Belgium. This is his chance to go and prove it. And certainly to touch on the Premiership state of play, Rangers don't have a lot to play for in Premiership terms. Yes, the games need to be won. Yes, we need to see improvements in performances still. But they do have an opportunity. Games like Sunday, the ideal opportunity to give these guys a chance. Play Rencialas, play Rice, play Curtis, anyone else that's on that fringe, give them a shot and see if they're going to be good enough.
I know you're on with Johnny earlier in this marathon of a day, but Lyall Cameron, what's your immediate thoughts? I mean, I don't know what you've been doing today apart from your work, but I presume you've not been watching Dundee games back on Y-Scout, so I don't know how strong your opinions are in this signing, but what's your kind of top line thoughts on it?
You're hugely underestimating the amount of work that I can get through in a day. If you don't believe that I've watched every ball that Dundee have kicked this season, no, I've not. I've seen Lyall Cameron play against Rangers, obviously at closer hand, and I think it's a signing that makes a lot of sense. As I said to Johnny earlier on, he's never going to be a headline grabbing one. I don't see guys rushing out in the summer to get Lyall Cameron's name in the back of their new home top. But I think it's a signing that ticks a lot of boxes. We've spoken about, and also Neil's mentioned in his interview with you a couple of months ago, Rangers want to sign more Scottish talents. They want to try and kind of maximise their influence in that market. So I think it makes sense for them to go down this road. He's going to be a fairly inexpensive bit of business, not going to come on huge wages. Obviously coming with no transfer fee. There will be a tribunal fee. Interesting to see what that's set at, but it makes sense. You're buying into his potential. You're buying into what he can be next season, but really what he can be in the seasons after that. So I don't think it's not a headline grabbing one, but it's a sign that makes a lot of sense. And I can see why they've done it. If you want to know more about Lyall Cameron, if I do say so myself, there's an excellent piece on the website tomorrow morning with one of his former managers, kind of going through Lyall's kind of formative years and a bit about him as a person, a bit about him as a player. So I can't give you a signing, but I can still give you a plug.
I thought you were going to say my piece that I put out earlier today on Lyall
Well,
Cameron.
always.
There you go, always. We do have what I've called a bite-sized scout report, just about 900 words or so, with some stats bomb information on Cameron, a few top-line bits of information. I mean, what stands out to me is, you're right, Niels Coppen has spoken about this before, trying to sign a breakout Scottish talent most seasons where appropriate. That makes sense because Rangers need that cohort for their European squads. Cameron, a couple of things that stood out to me was his creative stats, his creative passing stats are some of the best outside of the old firm in terms of midfielders, and they've jumped up quite a lot for last season, scored 5 goals last season, there's 5 by January this season. Quite a busy midfielder who I think is more of a passer than a ball carrier. But what stood out to me is he arrives in the box quite well, and he seems to have kind of the physical capabilities to go while he's small, and he's not someone who's maybe going to physically dominate the game. He has the kind of capabilities to go end to end and arrive into the box as well. So, yes, an interesting one. As I was going to bring you in, Johnny, but you've done it yourself. We're just talking about Lyall Cameron, so I'll get your thoughts. But Chris, listen, before you go, I've had this started since the start, just to end your night on a positive note. Let's see if I can find it. Off topic, but is there still somewhere you could buy Chris's book, Going for 55? Chris, it has been a while since that particular title win, but can you still get it? I presume so. Online somewhere, is that right?
You can indeed still get it, and it's not in the bargain bins just yet. So it's still available on Amazon, and you can still pick it up. So if you want to relive glories from yesteryear and relive that campaign, I would certainly urge you. I spoke about my Lyall Cameron piece tomorrow morning, been excellent. The book is even better than that. So wow. Thank you to whoever that was that's asking. And I'm just going to go back in the house and find out if that was Mrs. Jack that's actually just give her as an impromptu plug for my for the book there.
Yeah, well, Chris, you deserve about a week in the cryo chamber, so off you go, and we will speak to you soon. Thanks very much for all your work over this month. Right, Johnny, we're going to see us through. The mood, I would say, is reflective amongst Rangers supporters watching us. But listen, we've spoken a little bit about either side, the pros and cons, the devil's advocate argument. But what's your kind of, I know you were on earlier with Chris, but what's your immediate feeling and sense of not just this transfer window, but Rangers transfer business overall after it emerged, and we reported a couple of hours ago that would be business done for this particular January transfer window?
I'm not surprised, and I can completely understand where the club are coming from, in that you don't really want to throw good money after bad. The season has not gone well so far. Do you want to give this current manager a load more money to go and spend when, let's be honest, 10 points behind Celtic? We've just come out of January and just into February. If the manager gets to the end of the season and there's that level of gap, then there may well be discussions about his future. And that's the first thing. It's just obvious. Secondly, do you get the value you need to get in January? Very difficult. Rangers have actually done well at times in January. Nico Raskin brought in January. Todd Cantwell, who I think a lot of people on the chat will be going mad that I'm even mentioning him, but I think overall a reasonable signing for Rangers brought in January. You can do good deals in January, but they're rarer than hen's teeth. They're difficult. There's a million deals I could quote you in January that haven't gone well for Rangers. You think of that window where they brought in, amongst other players, Amad Diallo, James Sands, and of course Aaron Ramsey. Everyone's thinking it was a great window. You look back now and you think, wow, not so much. There's a lot of gambles at this stage normally, isn't there? And I think Rangers have decided they're not going to go back down that road. They're not going to do the Hollywood glitz and glamour. They're not going to make the same mistakes over and over again. What they're going to do is they're going to be rational. They're going to be sensible. They're going to be boring. And listen, nobody likes boring, but if there's one club that could do with a bit of boring for a little while, it might just be Rangers, given the drama and the upset and the decision-making that's gone on in the last few years. Maybe it is just time for a reset. Maybe it is just time to bring through some of these young players. I still think the squad's short, Josh, but I'll also be honest and say I think the league's gone. Do you want to spend a load of money to win a Scottish Cup? Do you want to spend a load of money to go out in the next round of the Europa League, which can happen? You know, if you thought you could spend 15 million and get to the Europa League final, then obviously you're going to do that. But we're talking about a real world here. We're talking about a market at that level, the Europa League, where that kind of money is just peanuts. You know, you look at Manchester United, you look at Spurs, and that's two teams Rangers have played. That kind of money is just the kind of money that they put out on a development player, you know. So, listen, I think it's a case of Rangers fans having to take their medicine and just having to accept that there's going to be some exciting young players given a chance, and that Philippe Clement's got to make the best with what he's got at the moment. And I think the real fireworks and the real further development of this squad will happen in the summer. To get back to your original point, Josh, to look at the transfer window so far, I've got to give credit to Niels Koppen. I think what you have to say, being balanced, is that Rangers haven't been good enough to this stage. They've been getting better. There's no doubt this is a better team now than the team we saw in November, and certainly a much better team than the team we saw in August. But I think we've seen young players who've been brought in for a small amount of money, players like Yefte, players like Connor Barden, players like Igor Mann, who's the most obvious one, who have done really, really well and look like they're going to be right good players for Rangers. And that's good value. It's been brought into the club without too much spend. And then you look at other players that have been brought in. I think Czerny, no one would deny he's been an excellent signing, an excellent loan signing. And listen, everybody would love to keep Czerny at the club based on what he's done, based on his age, based on his profile. The fact is, it looks like it's a deal that may be a Rangers price range. You may be looking at £6.5, £7, £8 million, given what he's done since he's arrived in the building. Now, you can quote back at me some of the players that haven't worked. I think Robin Proper, I was very, very critical, Josh. I've been very, very critical of him. But I will say this. I've also got to hold my hands up and say he's improved. There's no doubt over the last 6 weeks he's got better. He's absolutely got an issue with big, strong centre forwards. But I'm coming round to the idea that he could be a useful squad player. Still not convinced he'll ever be truly suited to Scottish football. Yeah. But listen, there's no doubt he's improved. And then in terms of other players that have come in, and Ciala, I think, has got a lot to offer. That's another good young player that's been brought in. And overall, I just think you see the foundations that are there in this Rangers squad now. There's a lot of good players, but they need more.
I agree, and Chris and I spoke about that. I think you can simultaneously say, look, like, especially with the Rangers don't have a lot of money to play with, and they had £17 million in losses, so you can't ignore that. And the UEFA money that came in the other day certainly helped. They don't have the league campaign to play for, but they do have a European campaign to play for, and they also have a Scottish Cup to win, and they have a season to end well. And I think from Clement's point of view, that will be his frustration, in that he'll know he's very much still, whether he says it publicly or not, certainly in the eyes of fans, he is still vying for public opinion, popular opinion going into next season. So I think you can simultaneously say, look, has enough money been made available to recruitment at the moment in isolation, because there hasn't been much to work with, whilst and obviously criticise the deals done in the past and the money paid out, as we've done 100 times and explained how we've got to this point, while saying that generally for the work that Rangers had to do in the summer and have had to do in their squad overall, the signings and the recruitment has been good. There's a clear pattern of what they're trying to do. And the fact that they're signing younger players, I think they're erring on the right side of the risk and caution, because rather than trying to spend ambitiously and hope it brings a return, they are maybe paying slightly under or recruiting younger or going on slightly lower wages. But I think, as I said at the start of the stream, someone like Clinton and Ciala kind of embodies the fact that while up until November, December, people were saying, when will we ever see him? And understandably so, you see the long-term benefit of it. We were just speaking before you came on about Lyall Cameron. I was saying a little bit, we have a piece on the site today, a kind of bite-sized scout report on Cameron. I don't know if you've seen much of him, but does it feel like a few comments here on Cameron, which I'll read out, which maybe show the contrast in opinion. John says Lyall Cameron would never we'll get nowhere near Rangers years ago. That's how far Rangers have fallen. But then the comment here saying Lyall Cameron is a great signing. Great Rangers teams have always had a core of Scottish players. Singing the blues, says Lyall Cameron, is a sensible Walter Smith type signing. We need more players who know the league. Connor Barron maybe isn't a brilliant example today because he's not a good couple of months, but he was able to settle in pretty quickly, largely because I think he did know the league. And listen, Rangers need these signings, and if they can get them on free transfers, it kind of is just one that makes sense relative to. I don't know how good Lyall Cameron is going to be for Rangers, but he looks like a promising young player. And do you agree with that? That it just kind of feels like maybe the type of commonsensical signing that we've not seen Rangers make in the past. And again, if you sign a player at 22, you do have the potential to sell them on or get them off the books easier than if you sign them when they're 28, 29.
Yeah, listen, for the first thing I would say is not the sort of signing that Rangers would have made years ago. Well, listen, I don't know how old you are, pal, but I remember 3 players brought in by Walter Smith: Fraser Wishart, Gary Boland, Alex Cleland. These are the kind of players that Walter Smith would bring in to beef up the squad. Good, honest, salt of the earth pros who knew Rangers, who understood the club, who could come in. They weren't going to make a big dent in Europe. They weren't going to drive you to a title, but they would add to the squad and they would be part of an overall squad that would take you places because they could be relied upon. They would come in, they would give you a 7 or an 8 out of 10, or even a 6 out of 10. Week in, week out, and just do the job. And Rangers desperately need more Scottish players. We've had an utter farce in terms of the management of the squad, where Rangers have had to put in a European squad with less players than they should have because they didn't have enough Scottish players.
Yeah.
So you had a smaller European squad than you should have because they just didn't have enough on the books. That's ridiculous. That needs to, that's something that clearly needs to end. And with this strategy that the club now have of bringing in at least one good Scottish player in every window, Josh, yeah?
That's the plan, yeah. And I think part of that is a recognition that, like all transfers and like all recruitment, not every single one will work. But if you can minimise the risk by, for example, generally signing these players in a tribunal fee, as you say, you need them for UEFA competition. There's a belief that I think there's obviously still a belief that Barron can be a really good player for Rangers. He's had a difficult couple of months, but you give him that understanding because he had a really good first couple of months, didn't he? And who doesn't take time at some point to settle in at Rangers? So I think it makes sense.
Josh, listen, this happens with fans of both the big clubs in Scotland, whereby when someone's linked from a lower club, they say, why would we sign him? He's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Person after person after person said Lewis Ferguson wasn't good enough for Rangers.
True.
And look what Lewis Ferguson
might have been one of them. And
lots of people on Twitter would tell me that Aaron Hickey wasn't good enough for Rangers. Look what he's done since.
Mm-hmm.
There is a snobbery about young Scottish talent and about performers in this league. And yes, they might come in, and yes, they might not be good enough. But there's a number Rangers have allowed to slip through their fingers over the last few years. Disastrously so, to be honest.
Yeah.
And this is a kid who has got 15 goal contributions in 30 games for a Dundee team that is deeply average at best. They're sitting in 10th.
Yeah.
So
deeply average. You don't want to be called deeply average, do you? I mean,
listen,
I
think the Scottish League this year.
I agree. It's not as what I think the point you're making is it's not as if he's sitting in the opposition half for the whole game and
correct
and dictating. I agree.
He's a creative player playing for a Dundee team that's not the best. Now, listen, I don't mean to be disrespectful from Dundee.
No.
I think he's done a good job, actually. At Dundee, Tony Docherty. And they've had a good season up till a certain point, and it's kind of fallen away, and that's why they're down in 10th. It's incredibly tight.
Yeah.
But I think the league this year is the poorest that I can ever remember the top flight being in my lifetime. It's extraordinarily poor below Rangers and Celtic. Really, really dreadful. We've got a very weak Hearts, a very weak Hibs. Aberdeen started strong and have just completely exploded in a way that is totally inexplicable and suggests they were nowhere near as strong as what they looked at one point. And I really don't see much when I'm looking up and down the league at teams where you go, that's an interesting coach. They're doing something different. I think the league is brutal. I've got to be honest. It's really brutal at the moment. And the fact that Rangers have struggled against some of the teams in that league to break down that block has been poor. So listen, in that sense, I think for a creative player to stand out in a league where I don't think there's a great value or a great kind of protection given to that kind of player, I think suggests that he's got something about him.
Yeah.
And if you look at the way he plays, and I've spent a good bit of time on Wisecout today looking at him, and I think the one thing that really interests me, Josh, and it's something Rangers sometimes struggle with, is final ball. He's got a really good final ball. Reverse no-look pass, slotting people in. Now, there's more space when you're Dundee and you're counter-attacking than the Rangers will face. But he reminds me a little bit of Scott Allen when he was doing well in Scottish football. I think he's a similar kind of player. He's skillful, takes the ball in well, got a good engine. I think he's better than Scott Allen in that regard. But he can pick a pass, this kid. I've seen him do these lovely drilled passes that take out 3 or 4 players, the kind of score the kind of pass that gets you great packing scores. And then I've also seen lovely reverse passes that you're not expecting, pulling defences out of position and slotting someone through. He's also a good finisher. So I really like this. I really like signing Josh. I think it's massively low risk. And I think he's got the potential to be, over the course of the contract, a right good bit of business. And I think people should be careful of the whole snobbery thing about Scottish players and about a player coming from Dundee, because you look at the impact that Conor Barron had. You remember players like Kevin Thompson, like Chris Boyd, these are guys that came from other Scottish teams and ripped it up. And I could go back, if you go back to the 90s, there was lots of them that came from Scottish teams, lots of Scottish players. They were the backbone of Rangers sides. I mean, Richard Gough, I know he came from Spurs, but he was brought through at Dundee United and had all his success at Dundee United. He only spent a season in Spurs. And that's the greatest captain in the history of the club, with the exception of John Gregg. So I think while you wouldn't expect that from Lyall Cameron, what you can say is that the core of many successful sides has been picking the best players from the other teams in the league. And I think that's what the club should be doing.
Some comments on Cameron. Billy says Cameron is the best signing in his year group, exactly the type of player any successful Rangers squad should be bringing in. John says Cameron is a smart signing and a promising signing. Need a core of Scottish players. He's a no-brainer. Sir Walter always made these type of signings, and the greatest showman, that's a good YouTube name, isn't it? Said, boy I work with is a Dundee fan, and he thinks Cameron is going to be a better signing than Barron. If he's right, we could be on to winner. Yeah, we shall see about that, but I agree with you. I think it's low risk, relatively good potential. Ticks a lot.
Josh, I'm ready for a bit of a scrap with some of these guys in the comments.
Go on.
Talking about Conor Barron not being a good signing.
Okay.
I think there needs to, again, be a slight adjustment in terms of this kind of player coming in and expecting them to be a Rangers first team player, or they're not good enough and they're out.
Yeah. And he was at the start, wasn't he? He was for I think for the first 3 months of the season, he was one of Rangers' best 2 players. And he's obviously not a complete midfielder, but he almost overstretched expectations, and then because he'd overstretched those expectations is fallen under the ones he set. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, but you've got to remember he's 22 and he's come from life at Aberdeen where the demands are not as high. Yeah. And I think you should give him at least a season or 2 at that age and that profile and that wage to bed in. This is not like a Czerny who's coming in, you're expecting them to just be dominant or to be right up there. Now, every so often you get an Igga man who comes in and just rips the whole thing apart. And that's phenomenal. But it's rare. I think someone like Barron, you have to understand he's coming in as a squad player. He did very, very well at the start and he looked terrific. But I don't think Connor Barron's going to be a bad player for Rangers overall. And I understand people are upset about the 10-point gap in the league, but I think Barron's the kind of signing that Rangers need to make fundamentally.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I don't think he's, without getting into specifics of his game, I agree. I just think he overperformed a bit. As Stephen says there, Barron overperformed initially, will be a useful squad option for years to come. Listen, I want to get your thoughts on something else, Johnny, and I must find a point that we disagree on before the end of the show, because it wouldn't be a podcast without it. Need to bring
It's
up.
very unusual. Normally, you'll find
even on the phone. Normally, there's some football opinion that rubs one of us up the wrong way. Let me see if I can find it. It was a comment. Here we are. Sean says, "Boring is fine, Johnny, but we're crying out for a left winger." I mean, what do you make of that? Because I know a player we were speaking about off air this morning was Yanis Hadji. He's not a left winger, but he's playing as Rangers left winger. Obviously, the fact that Chefty is quite a quick player makes up some of the width on the left-hand side. The Oscar Cortez situation, we won't go into that. We're led to believe he's close to returning again, but that has been the case before. And we should say actually as well that Zach Lovelace's move to Millwall has been confirmed on the topic of left wingers. But what do you make of that, Johnny? Because listen, I'm in agreement with you generally. I think that boring's fine. Rangers have needed to do something different from what they've done. The short-termism, the short-term fix to get you up to a point. They've paid unsustainable wages, and the ramifications of that are still being felt. But do you think they are still light in that position, or do you think they're fine with Yanis Hadji domestically until the end of the season?
I think they're fine with Yanis Hadji until the end of the season, although I think you definitely need to get another winger for next season if you're really going to seriously go for the title. Mm-hmm. You look at it on paper, Cortez, Hadji, Lawrence even can play there at a push. Barami can play there at a push. Jeffy, Yilmaz have both played on the left further forward than their natural left-back position. So that is quite a lot of options. So I'm not too concerned about it, Josh. I have to be honest. The big thing for me about wingers is you want to have two on each side that can genuinely slot in and out, because being wingers, they're going to be inconsistent. Very, very rare for Rangers to be able to get a player on the wing that's going to be able to give you an 8 out of 10 week in, week out, score or assist every week. Those players are worth a fortune and they don't hang around in Scottish football for very long. So given that they're going to likely be inconsistent, you want to swap them over and change them. And I think from an ideal squad setup point of view, you'd like to have another body in there given Cortez' injury situation. But listen, you can't just, and I know there's a sort of temptation because there's so much frustration with Cortez, but you can't throw the baby out the bathwater. You've got to imagine that this guy is going to come back, and when he does, there needs to be space for him to come back and perform, because otherwise it's £4.5 million down the drain. Mm-hmm. So they can't just be like, well, Cortez he's flaky in terms of his injuries, or has been since he arrived. It's really, really frustrating because I think when he first arrived, he looked like a real player when he came into the squad, and you were looking at what he offered, and it was something exciting. It was something different. But he's just never really come back in and looked like that level, like he's going to get to that level again. And that's obviously an issue, but he has to be given that opportunity. People will say, this is Rangers, you don't get time, but if there's ever going to be a chance to give players time, it's when you've got a league season that is effectively written off. And that's what this is. There is no doubt in it. Listen, I thought Rangers would lose the league by quite a lot on day one of the season, because I looked at the squad and I looked at Celtic, and it was hard to be positive or optimistic about the two setups. And what has always been required is for Rangers to be going on an upward line, an upward trend of form, performances that suggests that next season will be the season, or next season at the very least will be extraordinarily tight, leading to the title in the season after that. And I'm not convinced that we're there yet. I need to see quite a bit more you need to see the consistency of performance, the consistency of results, the sense that Rangers are genuinely able to break down the block, which has always been the problem this season anyway. And we'll see. Nobody has to rush and make a decision because we know this manager's going to be there until the end of the season unless he's a disaster. The board have made that quite clear on and off the record. So it's just as straightforward as come probably late April, Rangers can start to internally address this aspect of their season and where you get better. But I think, and I've been saying this now, I think 2.5, 3 months, I see some solid foundations there. I think if Rangers can have another transfer window, like the summer transfer window, with the same level of investment and the same level of quality coming in, I think they'll be in right good shape.
Yeah, what you need to remember about the last summer window as well, and we've reported this at different points when we've been discussing how transfers work and the process by which they take place. In a normal transfer window, you'd be signing 3 or 4 players, and Rangers signed 11. Their initial plan was, I believe, to sign 13 or 14 in the summer. That was dependent on outgoings. And if you think of the background work, the uncertainty on top of that, to then go and sign those 11 players, I think the hit rate has been pretty good. There's some question marks still over by Rami in that number 10 position. Diamandi, I think everyone can see is a player of real quality, and actually in the type of games where he's maybe not put as much of his stamp on it in recent weeks, I think he has, such as Dundee United away from home. So I tend to agree with you, Johnny, but you can always understand this. People want business on transfer day and the deadline day, don't they? It's a thing in and of itself. Listen, we've got a few more minutes before we
just
close
on
up.
that,
Josh.
Do
you have any burning points? You do, yes.
I think just generally the transfer window's slowed down. The razzmatazz of Jim White and his yellow tie. You see in England, clubs are just not doing it anymore. There's no big deals happening on deadline day so far. Nothing massive anyway. And I can't tell you how many deadline days in a row it's felt like a bit of a damp squib. When was the last time we got a really good late deal? It's just kind of not really happened. And I wonder if just too many teams have been burnt too many times. The scenario, I don't know if you saw Sunderland Till I Die, but season 2, there is an absolutely delicious episode where Sunderland are going for a striker, and the owner, Stuart something, I can't remember his second name, but he comes in with all the right sound bites about how he's going to manage the club as a business and it's going to be properly done and they're not going to get bounced into anything. And then you see him just literally go into meltdown on transfer deadline day because of the pressure to get a Will Grigg deal over the line. And he ended up paying £4 million and about 30 grand a week or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact wage figure, but it was certainly £4 million to get Will Grigg in. And I just thought, watching that, it's just amazing what that pressure does to people. It just melts them. And I think more and more clubs are stepping back from the madness and just saying, we're not doing it anymore. And I think Rangers are one of those clubs, there's no doubt about it.
Do you know that Derek Clark made a cameo in Sunderland Till I Die?
I did know that, the back of his head, wasn't it?
In a press conference cutaway, and he mentions it probably once every 2 months or something like that.
Certainly told me that 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, that's a good bit of Derek Clark trivia for you. Johnny, we've got 5 more minutes. Is there any other pressing Rangers points that you want to bring up? Any other opinions of the transfer window that you've not tested as of yet, or will I get through a couple more?
I think it's an interesting one, Josh, because I'm looking at the comments and they're a lot more calm than I thought they would be. I think there's kind of an acceptance of the situation and an acceptance of where the club's going to go. And I think part of that is because, to be honest, because of the Man United game and because the excitement, I think, that was generated by those young players coming on and standing tall, Bailey Rice, 18 years old, Old Trafford, just coming on and just looking comfortable. Finlay Curtis going on there and, looking brave and not being overawed. I think if you give young players the chance at Rangers, the fans will respond to that. And, you're not going to get forever. You're not going to get forever at Rangers, regardless of what happens. But this is a club that I think it does value and it does idolise those guys that have gone from the terrace to the first team. You think of Ian Durrant in the 1980s, and once he came back from his injury, he was still a massively popular player. He was never the same player, but a beloved character. You look at Barry Ferguson, who's my generation, my era. I'm not sure about Barry as a pundit so much, but I think he was he was a truly wonderful player, someone that I look back on and just think like that the good arrogance that Barry showed on the pitch, the leadership, the ability to take the ball in tight spaces. You don't see that from young players very often. And the fans loved him. Nathan Patterson, before he left, the idea of this young buccaneering kid coming into the team, his best player at the time was another right back who was also the captain. But then look at this kid, look at the way he busts up and down that wing, look at the physicality of him. He's got a goal in him, he's got a million assists in him, and he was taken away far too early for Rangers fans, I think. But the 16.5 million probably dulled the pain a little bit on that one. But the reason I mention these three players is just because that step from that youth team right through, Rangers fans absolutely love that. It's a difficult place, it's demanding, and I think this part of the change is not just results. I think it's people like to see young players getting a chance, and it's been so long since there was a genuine pathway. And I think what you've seen a clearing out of deadwood to give those players a pathway. Now, where I'd slightly push it onto the manager and give him a little bit of criticism, I think there was a double substitution at the weekend where I'm going, you're 3-0 up. I know you want to give Tom Lawrence a run out because you're probably going to use him at some point. It's not as if he's going to get just discarded. But I think there needs to be a real attempt to be proactive and to getting these kids more game time.
Needs to be consistent, doesn't it? It can't just be a once every month kind of thing. It needs to be sustained. Because
Lawrence feels like a brave new world in the way that Rangers approach their youngsters. But at least you feel like they've got a plan now. If they've not made it by the time they're 18, they're older than 18, they're going to go out on loan regardless. They're going to get pushed out on loan because they're not getting those competitive minutes otherwise. The good ones, the ones that they want to keep, they'll be given a chance in the first team and they'll be given that pathway. That makes a lot of sense to me. But the manager has to be on board with it, and the manager has to give them, has to be proactive in giving them the opportunity. There's been so many players over the years that have made it almost by accident. Players that have done really, really well for club and country that nobody really pinpointed as being the next guy. And quite often the guys that people say, "Oh, this one's immense," it doesn't happen. So sometimes they just need the chance. They just need to be put in and thrown in, and we'll see how they respond. And I think I and everyone else and everyone in the comments will be thinking we want to see that from Philip Clement and Rangers this year, because you're seldom going to have another season or another half season where there's very little pressure, because the league is done. There isn't that relentless winning pressure, because it would take a monumental collapse of epic proportions, and this Celtic team has got too much depth, and I just don't think that they would. They have that in them, So I don't think this is going to be the season for that. Scottish Cup's still there, absolutely to be won, and if you look at the League Cup, it's there to be won, absolutely. And there's two more Old Firm games that'll be really important.
The Europa League. And the Europa League, which we'll see where
the Europa League takes care of itself. I'm not getting involved in any kind of predictions about the Europa League, Josh, because you know what happened. The Europa League crept up on us in 2021, and it was one of the greatest things, and probably the greatest 6 months of either of our careers in terms of enjoying those games and going to those games. And nobody was talking about the final, I think, until maybe after Braga.
Yeah,
we were in the semi-final before we were talking about the final. And then you're thinking they've done so well to get to Red Bull Salzburg. They can't get Red Bull, Leipzig. Sorry, they can't get possibly past this team. You know, this is just a step too far. And then you go there, and I think it was 86th minute that
81.
Angelino, was it Angelino scored the goal?
Angelino from a corner, I think 81. It was a volley.
You thought 1-0 Ibrox, and then we all know what happened in that second leg. So listen, let's hope it's another run, because these are just absolutely magnificent. And you know, one thing that you can't get enough of is European nights at Ibrox when it really matters. And from the last 16 onwards, it really matters.
Yeah. Couldn't say it better myself. Listen, we'll leave it there. We've done an hour. We've brought you hopefully some good conversation around transfer deadline day if no new signings announced. If you're just joining us, Zach Lovelace has joined. Millwall Rangers will receive a fee for that deal, and believe that largely driven by the player wanting to move back to London. Lovelace, who obviously has been at the club now for about 2.5 years. But listen, myself and Stevie Clifford are going to be on in the morning. We'll have a little bit more of a roundup. We'll look at the squad depth chart. We'll assess in the cold light of day and not on transfer deadline night. But until then,
getting warmed up.
Oh well, I wasn't. I don't think everyone else was. This has been officially quite a long day. So I'm going to bed. I don't know about everyone else, but thank you for joining us. Johnny will be back at some point this week. We'll have all your best Rangers coverage as ever right throughout the course of the week as the big games keep coming in February. But until then, thanks for joining us on this transfer deadline day special. We'll speak to you in the morning.